We are coming to the 10th anniversary of the Arab Spring, the momentous series of events that started in hope with the desperate act of a Tunisian vegetable seller. With the return of another pharaoh in Egypt, the impunity with which he has meted out retribution upon those that were opposed to the regime, and the killing fields of Syria, whose soil today stands soaked with the blood of martyrs, makes even the most optimistic person surmise that the Arab Spring has turned into what can only be called a cold winter. Over the coming weeks and months, the thinking Muslim takes a look at the tumultuous decade from multiple perspectives. What went wrong? How did an event that reverberated across Muslim capitals with echoed chants so horribly go wrong? And what lessons can we learn from the mistakes made? From my side, I once was full of hope for change, naively believing that the autocracies that litter the Muslim world would fall one by one, their fragility reinforced by nothing but fear. Certainly, these regimes deserve to fall, yet those that had for decades claimed to have a blueprint for change were found wanting. If Islam was to have a central role in this change, the saddening realization was that Islamic groups and parties were severely ill-prepared at best and compromised at worst. The mess that is now Syria laid bare the problems associated with violent uprisings and the futility of asymmetric conflict, with some surmising that all hope is lost. We take a deep look at the Arab Spring and ask the following questions over and over again. Why did it end up like this? And what, if anything, can we do about it? Alhamdulillah, the Thinking Muslim has been going for over a year now, and we've received some amazing feedback from our listeners. We really would appreciate your views. Please do leave your review on Apple Podcasts and other apps and send us an email. Our address can be found in the description of this program. These past few months, we have been heartened by the response to our free Thinking Muslim course looking at Islam and liberalism. We are soon going to expand these sessions to a university-wide course in association with Islamic societies and MSAs from around the world. If you are involved with your student society, please get in touch to see how you can co-host this course this November. Now, our guest this week is Dr Osman Bakhach from Lebanon. I've known Brother Osman for many years and I've benefited from his analysis on events. Osman was very active on Arab media channels at the height of the Arab Spring and remains an insightful commentator on events. This week, we take a deep look at Egypt and Syria, unpicking the complex circumstances that led to both countries deepening their respective authoritarian rules. And I asked Brother Osman, what went wrong in Syria and Egypt? Dr. Osman Bakhach, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and welcome to the Thinking Muslim podcast.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakallah khair. It's a pleasure being with you.
Dr. Osman, 10 years ago we saw the beginnings of what became known as the Arab Spring, with the tumultuous events, I suppose, that started in Tunisia. Can you please just take us back 10 years and describe your feelings when these events unfolded?
Yes, well, even way before the so-called Arab Spring, I may give a snapshot into kind of the general main street here in the Middle East. Meaning, I grew up in the eye of the storm, if you will, going all the way back to the 1967 war, where Israel had attacked Egypt, Syria, Jordan, and the whole ensuing the issue of the Palestine issue, and always the frustration and the agonies between the aspiration of Muslims seeking an Islamic way of life and versus the imposed secular order imposed by the colonial powers and supposedly taken over by the local strongmen in the Arab world, for that matter. So within this context, really, when the first event ignited in Tunisia back in December 2010, certainly I, among majority of the people here, really, we very much had back then, we had very high hopes that we were hoping that this, as you know, certain, especially when the snowball started rolling and growing, we had aspiration that finally there is a possibility for seeing some real change in our day-to-day, life and socio-economic and political situation in the Middle East. So yes, I would say back then really there was a great aspiration and hopes, but yet then again, on the other hand, being seasoned and accustomed to the various trickery of the politics and the power struggle, international intervention. Also, at the same time, we had this inner fear that, in a way, this is too good to be true, if you will.
Now, you said we had an inner fear, and that, in a sense, became a reality, and the Arab Spring quickly descended into something which we could argue could now be described as an Arab winter. Egypt quickly followed the Tunisian uprising, and the speed by which Mubarak fell probably amazed you and I and amazed everyone. On reflection, were we duped by how fast the system was ready to give up on its leadership and on its president?
Well, not. Yes, you are right. You are right in saying we were surprised by the quick fall of Mubarak. Mubarak was a long time ally of the U.S., and certainly he wouldn't fall with the U.S. not knowing or allowing it. So yes, he fell rather quickly, and for that matter, even similarly in Tunisia. But at the same time, actually, and knowing the anarchy in the streets, when you go back to January in Egypt, seeing these hundreds of thousands or millions of Egyptians pouring to the streets and screaming and shouting, "Ashab yurid isqat al-nizam," that people want to bring down the regime. That was nice slogan. It was nice, easy. It kind of synchronized with the aspiration and feelings of the common, day-to-day common Muslim everywhere in the Middle East area. But also at the same time, when you have this kind of political acuteness, you would know that ultimately, the one who called the final shot are those who really hold on to the main joints of the power, the so-called deep state, if you will. So really, at no time, and even I have said this repeatedly, I don't know, dozens of times over the years, and when addressing the issues in Tunisia, in Libya, in Egypt, I have said this dozens of times, and I always appealed to the protesters and their leaders to ensure that indeed the revolution is complete. In other words, not to accept a so-called compromise, not to accept half solution, because I knew anything called half solution, it's a suicide. So I wasn't so naive, more so knowing. I knew fully well that to bring down the regime, it means you are clashing against the United States, and United States will not sit by idle watching, Egypt. Egypt is a major bastion of American influence. It's a major base for American influence in the region. The American would not sit by idle, and just let it go away from their hands. This is just, it's a joke. It's totally out of thinking. So always we had this fear that the deep state, if you will, would emerge at the end of the day in control. Okay, and because we have seen a similar episode like in Pakistan or in Philippines, where America would, if and when X, Marcos in Philippines or in Pakistan, so America would have no problem in replacing these jockeys, so-called rulers. So And actually, this question again, it hit on the issue of the lack of the leadership in among this popular uprising. There was no coherent central leadership with a vision, with acuteness, with knowing what to do and how to do it, etc. As we will delve into the details of this process more, I think, during the discussion.
Yeah, but you say the lack of leadership, but from where I'm sitting, the Muslim Brotherhood was regarded, and maybe to an extent, maybe a lesser extent, but still is, regarded as the most organized movement, especially in Egypt, and its roots are spread across the population, and it was able to bring out large numbers of protesters at the critical stages of the revolution. And so, it sometimes is quite hard to believe that that level of organization, especially an organization that's endured previous regimes of oppression, that they once the decision was made to take power, that they were disorganized and lacked leadership.
Well, here you are hitting a raw nerve. You are hitting the crux of the dilemma, namely the fact that, yes, on the one hand, as you described, on the one hand, Muslim Brotherhood is truly a grassroots movement. It's very large, very well organized internally, but still, however, this doesn't mean necessarily that they had a clear political vision. They had none of it. The Muslim Brotherhood, they raised the slogan, Islam is the solution. This was their slogan for decades. And indeed, yes, when the time came for election, they got a big share of the popular vote, because most of people, they want Islam. Like in the parliament election held in Egypt, about 75% or even close to 80% of the votes went for both Muslim Brotherhood and the Salafi movement. But still, both of these Islamic parties or movement, Muslim Brotherhood and the Salafi, neither of them had any clear vision, political vision or understanding. And just for the benefit of those kind of who may have forgotten the details of what happened early on in the revolution, even before the fall down of Mubarak, the Muslim Brotherhood, they sent a delegation who met with Omar Suleiman, the deputy of Mubarak, and all the ceiling of their demand back then, they were willing and ready to make a deal. Say, okay, look, we can call this off, all of this revolution, or not revolution, uprising back then, in exchange that you accept us, you give us legal recognition, because in the election held in Egypt in the summer 2010, Muslim Brotherhood, they got zero seat in the election. Of course, that election always had been rigged under Mubarak. So Muslim Brotherhood always, from the day, if going back to the days of Jamal Abdel Nasser, they always had this dilemma and concern of being legitimate, of having, to be able to operate publicly and with the full protection of the law. So before the fall of Mubarak, they sought this kind of deal with Mubarak, but then the events in the street went faster than them. Later on, Mubarak was gone. Then became a question, okay, now the next phase, the next page in the Egyptian revolution. And then again, they struck a deal with the ruling junta, with the military junta in Egypt. They struck a deal with them, leading to an eventual election of Mohammed Morsi as president. You may have forgotten, let me remind you, you may have forgotten that early on, the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, they openly, publicly, they declared that we do not seek the position of the presidency of the republic. No, we don't want it. As a matter of fact, one of their key leaders, Dr. Abdul Mun'im Abdul Futuh, he was with them, and he was very prominent activist among the Muslim Brotherhood. He said, no, we have to go for it. We have to run for it, and people are with us. And they said, no. He, Dr. Abdul Futuh, he ran, he announced his candidacy for the presidency, and they dismissed him. The Muslim Brotherhood, they dismissed him. They kicked him out. And later on, when take another, the Shura Council of Muslim Brotherhood, they had this fateful meeting debating whether to participate in the presidential election, and it was only one vote. One vote made the difference. They said, yes, we'll go for it. And I remember very well that the ex Murshid, the Murshid Am, the leader of Muslim Brotherhood, the previous one, Dr. Mahdi Akif, he said afterward, look, this decision will cost us dearly. This is wrong. This is very wrong. It will cost us dearly, but nevertheless, the decision was made. So you can see all along this kind of zigzag, one step forward, one step backward. And this highlight really the lack of political awareness, political vision. They were not ready. And see, this will take us to another level of really discussion here. The Muslim Brotherhood, yes, they are popular, a grassroots movement, but when you kind of put them on the spotlight, you'll see that they have failed to produce a mature political vision, dealing with the government and the states and the various ways of addressing and governing. Actually, this is totally lacking in their.
Okay, but let's take their perspective. The Muslim Brotherhood has been the subject of state repression since their formation in the 1920s. They see this uprising to which they contribute, and they contribute lives and men to the uprising. And now they have an opportunity to govern in the country. And as you quite rightly said, the Muslim Brotherhood was the most organized movement in Egypt. Yes, of course, they've got this reservation, and you've explained why that reservation existed. But then Morsi, President Morsi, he became president as a result of the presidential election. Why is it that at that point the Muslim Brotherhood could not manage to hold on to power? I mean, you said earlier on that the street was very much in favor of Islam. Well, here we've got Islam. We've got the Morsi government, and we've got, for the first time in Egypt, in modern Egypt, we've got a government which reflects the sentiments, as you said, the sentiments of the people. Yet the people ultimately rejected the Morsi government barely a year after his presidency. So what went wrong for Morsi?
You cannot say that people rejected Morsi. On the one hand, really, there was big failure of Muslim Brotherhood. Now, I mentioned to you before the Dr. Abdul Mun'im Abdul Futuh. Dr. Abdul Mun'im Abdul Futuh, he was a leading leader within Muslim Brotherhood. Yet, when they dismissed him, fine. Then Morsi became president. Good. They still, Muslim Brotherhood, see, once they got to power, they dealt with the government, with the state. They dealt with the state like being, a farm for them. So really, they succeeded in winning the animosity of other people. Like Abdul Mun'im al-Futuh, he was one of them, and yet they refused. Morsi refused to sit down with him. Muslim Brotherhood refused to sit down with him. They refused to say, hi, how are you? Come, let's work together. So, and by the same logic, they also managed to create this wedge between them and the Salafi. I mean, when you go if you go back to that scene when General Sisi, when he announced his coup d'etat on July 3rd, and next to him, of course, on the one, he had the Sheikh al-Azhar, he had the Pope of the Christian, but he had next to him sitting the leader of the Salafi party. I mean, this is scandal by all means. So, but also, of course, the Salafi are to be blamed for their failure and their treachery. This is no doubt. But at the same time, the Muslim Brotherhood, they have failed to win them over. Or, like for that matter, Sheikh Hazem Abu Ismail. Sheikh Hazem Abu Ismail, he was an independent, and he had a good follower, really, and he was always, a matter of fact, he had a clear sense of the danger. He knew all along that the army is there working to sabotage this new experiment, if you will. The army is working to undermine the all of this new elections, etc., etc. And he publicly, openly, a number of times, he cautioned and warned against this, and they failed to listen to him. So it's not only Muhammad Mursi as such, it's really the failure of the Muslim Brotherhood as a movement. They kind of, and this is, that takes us to the issue of, you cannot have a half revolution. You cannot have a half revolution. They had the fantasy of, let's be smart. Let's be smart. Let's give assurance to the American and to the military that, look, we mean no trouble. We are nice kids. We will play nice by the rules of the game that you put. We will respect Camp David. Israel is our neighbor. So we will not rock the boat. We will play by the rules. We'll be a good player. So they were naive in this mentality.
And did this naivety extend to the remnants of the old regime, the so-called deep state, as Morsi took power?
You cannot have a half revolution. Everybody knew. I mean, this is ABC. The ex-regime, the previous regime of Mubarak. When you say people want to bring down the regime is not just the head of Mubarak or Sadat. If you go back to 1980, Anwar Sadat was killed. So what? What's changed? Nothing changed. So it's not a matter of removing Sadat or Mubarak or Shah Iran. You have to remove the whole structure. You have a whole structure having the grip over power over the country. You have to remove them. Say similar to what that's what happened in Iran under Khomeini revolution, or that's what happened in the Bolshevik in Russia. So you cannot have a half revolution. You remove only Mubarak, and then you bring in Sisi. Sisi, he was appointed as defense minister. He was the director of army intelligence under Mubarak. I know, this is so naive, so short-sighted that yes, they walked into the trap with their hands and feet.
But then was the original position of the Muslim Brotherhood the correct position to not participate in the elections until you could guarantee the removal of the deep state and the removal of those institutions, or of the heads of those institutions that ultimately brought them down?
Election or no election, this is details. To begin with, I have said, and I repeat, to begin with, Muslim Brotherhood, they've never had the mentality of government, of how to govern a country or a state. They never had this mentality. They were not ready for it, and this is where the origin of everything goes. What they should have done, they should have. They should have eliminated all of this Mubarak strongmen in the army. Every officer in the army who had loyalty to Mubarak or to America should have been removed from his post, and the army should have been, brought under control to the state, to the new state. Look what Khomeini did in Iran, aside from other details, but what Khomeini did. The whole army of the Shah, he put him off totally. Khomeini exerted every effort to rebuild his own forces, and that's what happened in Russia. So you cannot run a new system with these leaders who they have been uh, running the machinery in Egypt under Mubarak. So you cannot trust them and keeping them in their places. So unless and until you have full control, there is no point in becoming president. Well, where you and this is that answer your question. What went wrong? How come people came to reject Morsi? Is because this so-called deep state they created crisis after crisis, from gasoline line to power to bread and butter to various details of day-to-day living. They created series of crises, and that's what kind of fueled the popular anger. And even then, mind you, it's not really, when you say popular anger, it's not as some Western observers they label it. There's like Feldman in his book about the Arab Winter, he claimed that people in Egypt they rejected Morsi. That was popular vote. This is no, it's not. It's not. Yes, the army they staged these demonstrations, and Morsi and Muslim Brotherhood they were kind of soft toward them, but in no way really this demonstration that took place in 30th of June 2013, that they represented the totality of the Egyptian populace. This is not true. It was all staged by the army and Mubarak strongmen before.
And what was the role of international actors and regional powers in the fall of President Morsi?
When you have the political understanding, again, as I said, America will not sit idle watching you grabbing power in Egypt. Egypt is a major power base for America. So really, you are getting into clash with America, and that's what the Americans did. If you go back to the details back then, these days, and before the removal of Morsi, the Sisi was defense minister, and he had intensive communication with Chuck Hagel in America, and so the Americans were aware of everything being cooked and prepared by the military to remove Morsi, and this thinking that by Muslim Brotherhood that we can outsmart them. Sadly, this is rubbish, and it repeats itself. That's what we had in Afghanistan to some extent. That's what repeated itself in Syria, where you have this naive, they say, we can get weapons and money from Qatar, from Saudi Arabia, from France, from Britain, and then we will, under the so-called excuse of, they call it cross shared interest, that we have an interest against Assad or the Soviet Union, Afghanistan, and the British do, or the Americans. So it's okay, it's win-win. This naivety, this naivety doesn't withstand the real test of events, as it became very clear in the case of Egypt.
Okay, so I've extracted from what you've said a number of reasons why the rebellion failed and why the government of President Morsi fell apart within 1 year. And it ranges, as you said, it ranges from a naivety when it comes to politics and government and how to govern, a failure to remove the trappings of the Mubarak regime, and an acceptance that removing just one man would somehow transform the state, as well as a failure, as you describe it, by the Muslim Brotherhood in trying to create a broad spectrum or a broad umbrella under which Muslim groups and Islamic actors could find a home. And so their attitude was very exceptional rather than very embracing to other opinions. And as you said, they lost the Salafis as well. But isn't that a problem across the board, right? Even if we move beyond Egypt, this sort of sectarian, territorial attitude that many Muslim groups, or as they call them, Islamist groups, they are affected by, that they have a very exclusivist type of attitude, and as a result, they find it very difficult to find it within their body of thinking to work with others. I mean, does that, in your eyes, need to change?
You are yes. You are very right here. You are very right that Muslim Brotherhood. Let's remember that it was founded back in 1928, so close to a century now, and so all along, the Muslim Brotherhood, they always they had the habit of looking at themselves as being the Islamic movement, period. So no matter what, I mean, sometimes in some cases, like Sheikh Saeed Hawa, rahimahullah, Sheikh Saeed Hawa, a prominent leader of Muslim Brotherhood in Syria, he had said this. He had said it explicitly in his book that Muslim Brotherhood is this take us to a concept in the Islamic jurisprudence here of the concept of al-Jama'ah, Jama'at al-Muslimin, Jama'at al-Muslimin. So the Muslim Brotherhood, they always consider themselves that we are the Jama'ah, meaning everyone else is a renegade, is a deviate, etc., etc. So yeah, they may be somewhat diplomatic. They don't say so, and so brutally or in a naked manner. But really, this is what infiltrate their thoughts, and that's why I said this is why they rejected Dr. Abdul Munim al-Futuh. I mean, fair enough. You have kicked him from the movement before the election. You won the election, but he's a devout, sincere Muslim that you have raised him for decades. He has been one of your leading characters. Why should you ignore him? Or Sheikh Hazem Abu Ismail, or the Salafi, or anybody else, Hizb al-Tahrir, etc., etc. And instead, they really, this kind of arrogance, if you will, it reflected this intellectual background they came from. They have refused, instead of appreciating the difficulties and the challenges waiting for them by the military in Egypt, instead of welcoming every contribution from the others, no, they kind of had this arrogant attitude, and this was not going to be accepted. There was this leading prominent intellectual. He described that he said he met with Mursi twice. Upon invitation, Mursi had invited a group of these writers, journalists, etc., trying to reach out to them. He said this one, I think his name Dr. Ala Aswani. He said, okay, we noticed something. We noticed that we raised questions to him. He has no answer. Then we raised questions. He has no answer. Then later on, second meeting, finally we understood that he has no answer because Mursi had to go back to the Politburo of Muslim Brotherhood, to the Maktab al-Irshad. So he said, look, it became obvious to us that this Mursi is a facade. He's just a front. He's just cover. He is not the one who makes the real decision. So this mentality of Muslim Brotherhood, that's what kind of led or contributed to their demise from power. They won the animosity of others. I know at one time they have refused to sit down with delegations, went to them from other Islamic movement. They refused to sit with them. So they had this kind of superiority, and so yes, that cost them dearly. That cost them dearly eventually.
And you made reference earlier to the role of the Salafis in removing Morsi from power and the support base for Sisi. Can you expand on what role the Salafi groups played in 2013?
Now, in Egypt, we cannot fail to include the role played by the Salafi. The Salafi also played a very negative role in Egypt. Then again, we go to a similar phenomenon here, where the Salafi, they never had a political mind. They never had that before. And now the Salafi is one title, but really under this title you have various groups. Some of them had direct support from the mukhabarat of Mubarak before the revolution or the uprising. And the Salafi overall, we know that if we were to cross-examine them closely, the common wisdom among the Salafi is that politics is haram, or political party are haram, etc., etc. That was their traditional standard viewpoint before the uprising. But then the dynamics of the uprising in Egypt, it kind of forced itself on them, so some of them opted, say, no, well, we have to, ultimately we have to kind of join the crowd, we have to follow the main street. So they did form parties, Hizb an-Nur and others. And then again, there was this division among themselves. So, but in brief, the Salafi played a major negative role against the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. And as I said earlier, that when Sisi announced the coup d'etat, the leader of Hizb an-Nur, Yasser Burhami, was sitting next to him. So adding this so-called legitimacy, if you will, to the coup d'etat led by the military. So, and this for the record and for history, if you will, this is a shame, and it's a disgrace what the Salafi leaders have done in Egypt. This is really they have to be held responsible for this treason they committed in Egypt.
Good. Now let's move on to Syria then. As I said, it's the most hurtful episode in this saga, and President Assad took a different line to that of Ben Ali and Mubarak. Can you please just talk us through how the initial civil society protest turned into a civil conflict?
Well, yes, you are right. The Syrian saga is very, very painful, to say the least. Then also to understand the reality here on the ground, the Syrian regime led by Assad, whether the son Bashar or his father Hafiz, the Syrian regime is a brutal dictator state. It's a brutal police state. And it's difficult to really explain at length the various atrocities and crimes committed by this state. Now, so it's not surprising at all, really, that this deeply rooted anger and frustration finally they found this opportunity, what they thought it was an opportunity to finally remove this brutal government and regime, for that matter. Of course, they looked forward to replicate the experience started in Tunisia and then in Egypt. They said, well, okay, if Mubarak was removed, if Ben Ali was removed, so why not we? Why not us here in Syria? They were naive in appreciating the political landscape, and many of them fell prey to the promises announced by Hillary Clinton, the American Foreign Secretary back then, when she gave several statements saying Assad has to go, Assad has to go. They said, well, okay, so this is a green light. So the days of Assad are numbered. And even though at the beginning the protests were peaceful, like you said, with the admission of Farouk Shara. Farouk Shara is the vice president of Bashar Assad. In an interview with the Lebanese newspaper Al Akhbar, he stated so explicitly. He said for the first 6 months, our police officers and mukhabarat, they were watching among the demonstrators whether some of them may be armed. They found none of it. So this decision to transform the uprising in Syria into military, this was very tragic and big disaster. It was encouraged by the regime in Damascus, but equally so, it was fully supported by foreign powers, as in Turkey, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and as well as France, Britain. So this at the beginning of 2012, as I recall, there was an interview with the New York Times with Rami Makhlouf. Rami Makhlouf is cousin of Bashar al-Assad, and he openly he issued a direct threat. He said, we will burn the country. Don't try us. He said, don't try us. We will not give up. We will fight to the bitter end. And if that meant destroying the country, so be it. So he was clear and explicit in what he stated, and that's what happened. So on the one hand, yes, the regime encouraged this kind of line of transforming the protest into a military, and at the same time, the Gulf states, they also thought they found a way to get rid of Bashar al-Assad, who was a strong ally of Iran. So slowly but surely, the beginning we witnessed this increasing influx of weapons, money, and formation of various military groups and revolutionary groups here and there under different names, titles, what have you. And also the snowball kind of grew bigger, and then it's still ongoing till now, where we are dealing with Idlib. So here, it's no secret now. It's open knowledge that the famous Jaish al-Islam in Damascus, Jaish al-Islam was directly financed by Saudi Arabia. Here and there, various whatever military or armed groups, they were supported by the Joint Command in Jordan or in Turkey. These facts now are well known. But so so Syria eventually became a proxy war, if you will, between these foreign powers, including, of course, Hezbollah intervened, Iran, and even Russia. So it grew, and now everybody has a say in Syria except the Syrians themselves.
I mean, it's interesting to draw parallels between the Egyptian uprising and the Syrian uprising. In many ways, the Syrian uprising initially started as more of a homogenous movement, right? These were civil society actors, and they refused to take up arms, and they called for the downfall of the regime. But that wasn't just located. It wasn't just the downfall of one man. They wanted the regime of repression to end. But in a sense, its outcome was even more disastrous, because these very quickly it turned into an asymmetric conflict and a civil war. And I wonder how much can we blame the leaders of the protesters who embrace these regional actors and allowed to be taken on a journey to ultimately turn this conflict into a military one.
Okay, I guess you know the saying that it takes two to tango. So it's not enough. It's not enough for one party to decide, okay, we will go full blown. So, and you raise a valid point here. What happened in Egypt? On the one hand, there was no external power. There was no external power. Saudi Arabia or Qatar or Kuwait or who knows, Turkey or who knows what, or Sudan. There was no external power who wanted to smuggle weapons inside to Egypt and encourage the formation of armed group. There was no foreign party to do so. So that's one thing. The other thing too, Sisi, in what he did in the massacre that he did in Rabia, he kind of drew a sharp line. said, in another word, he showed his teeth and say, look, don't mess with me. I have no problem in murdering whether hundreds or thousands. It's not an issue to me. So internally in Egypt, there was no strong demand, if you will, for armed struggle. Of course, there were a few handful of individuals. But it's not enough. But more important, there was no foreign power who was willing to kind of further encourage this armed struggle in Egypt, which is not the case in Syria. In Syria, from outside, there were these foreign powers, as I said, Turkey, Jordan, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, etc. And inside, sadly, there was this naive, hot-head, activist or whatever. And there was, in this regard, there was an important decision made by Assad early on, 2011. He released from the prison in Sudnaya, he released dozens and dozens of hardcore jihadi leaders. And he fully knew that these guys will go out and they will, they would be more than happy to, they are trigger happy, and they would surely go on to practice their favorite profession, jihad. He knew them. So that was a big move from his side. Now, in between, you always, and it's difficult here to go through the details, but like Jabhat al-Nusra, Nusrat al-Sham, there were this inside job, if you will. There was some major, what to say, like a firecracker, if you will. I mean, something nice for media attraction, or so there was some major big operation, but then they were carried by the inside apparatus of the mukhabarat, Syrian mukhabarat. In no time, the snowball really grew, and everybody jumped on the wagon. Qatar, Saudi Arabia, under King Abdullah back then. So, and they figured maybe now is good time, especially in the light of, not confusing, but in the light of various statements coming from the American administration, Obama, Hillary Clinton, that Assad has to go. And, if you recall, that was a famous statement from the Saudi Foreign Minister Adel Jubeir that Assad has to go, whether peacefully or by war. He repeated this dozens of times. So for a while, they got intoxicated with this idea that, yeah, Assad days are numbered, and yes, they became gung ho and let's go. And inside, sure, when they channeled the money, always there were few ignorant, whether ignorant or some of them, they may have been sincere, but so who didn't quite understand the political landscape, and they thought that with few weapons here and there, we can get rid of Assad. So yes, that and really that the events took a tragic turn, not to mention the rise of the Islamic State and so on.
I mean, on the case of the Islamic State of ISIS, it's clear that ISIS complicated the conflict and turned international public opinion, at least, against the militia groups and the civil society actors behind them. What did you make of ISIS's involvement when they entered the Syrian civil war?
Well, before ISIS showed up on the scene, really, the opposition in Syria, they had managed, back in 2013, by the beginning of 2014, the opposition, they had managed to get control over vast territory in Syria. Despite, and even then, they had this kind of inner rivalry. They had, whether Jabhat al-Nusra or Ahrar al-Sham and Fayrak al-Sham, etc., dozens of various titles and names. So they always had this kind of competition here and there on trying to get a bigger portion. So when ISIS came, that was another turn, another dramatic turn in the sequence of events. ISIS, also to remember that Islam initially it was titled Islamic State in Iraq. The initial title was Islamic State in Iraq, and this group, it's a jihadi group launched in Iraq. Later on, they kind of initially they held loyalty to Al Qaeda, but at the times of Mus'ab Zarqawi, 2006. But later on, they viewed themselves as being they thought of themselves as the true guardian of or champion of the Islamic cause, and they bypassed Al Qaeda. And it was the Islamic State in Iraq. They were the one who had sent Julani to Syria to launch Jabhat al-Nusra. Jabhat al-Nusra initially was an offshoot from Islamic State in Iraq. And later on, when al-Baghdadi announced his caliphate in Mosul in June 2014, and now he's Khalif. So he's Khalif, so in his mind, in his vision, everyone else has to fall in line, including, of course, his friend Julani. At this point, Julani said no. My loyalty is to Al Qaeda, not to you. So Julani announced his separation from Islamic State, and the two groups became opponents. So now ISIS, this is a key issue in their thinking. They consider themselves that they are the Islamic State, and the Khalifa is the Khalif, which means everybody else has to join them, or else she's a renegade or a rebel or so. So they gave themselves the legitimacy that we are the state. Who are you? And so later on, there were many disputes, many friction here and there, where people come and say, okay, let's seek a third, let's seek a tribunal, let's seek a third party, and their answer would be, no, we are the state. Who are you? And we don't sit with renegade groups or rebel. No, we are not equal. So this kind of filled their head with this motion that they are the state. And worse yet, and this takes us to another level here. The line of Salafi thought they had followed was so extreme, they succeeded in gaining the animosity of everyone else. So it's painful here to go through the details, but even on ground, the Islamic State, most of their fighting was against the other revolutionary group. That's what I said earlier, that in 2013, these various armed groups, they had liberated a good chunk of the Syrian territory. So now I just came over, and I just started fighting this opposition group, and grabbing control of these various areas. And for that matter, now I don't have statistics, but I would dare say, globally speaking, generally speaking, I would go on saying that 10% of the casualties who fell in the intra-fighting between these various opposition groups, 10% of them would have been enough to get rid of Bashar Assad in Damascus. But these people, no, they were too busy fighting each other to the joy of Bashar Assad, by all means.
What I've got so far is both in Egypt and in Syria, there was an extreme naivety on behalf of the actors on the ground. Isn't there a deeper problem? And that problem is that Islamic groups, or the Islamic scene, is a scene that has run out of ideas, and when we look at the Syrian civil war, for example, many Islamic groups around the world supported the militias and supported their activities against the regime, even though it was clear from day one that there were regional actors behind these groups, and it was quickly descending into a proxy conflict. So I suppose my question really is that and this is a question now that's been asked by a number of people who are critical of the entire scene of the Islamic groups. That these Islamic groups have failed multiple times in multiple ways, but also they reek of naivety and they misunderstand the serious task of removing these regimes and replacing these regimes with a form of Islamic government.
In a way, this question, it takes us to the bigger picture, which has been debated for decades, for that matter, way before the Arab Spring, which is namely what is the best way to really bring down these regimes and to establish an Islamic state. This issue has been under discussion for decades. And for that matter, if you remember also in Egypt, from 1974 to 1997, we are talking quarter of a century, there were several groups in Egypt, Al-Jama'ah al-Islamiyya, Al-Jihad group. They, for a good time, they advocated the argument that this government, the Egyptian government, being a taghut government, that they rule by kufr, then it is a farida, it's an obligation to bring it down by any means necessary, including fighting. And they did try that over a quarter century. They did launch successive campaigns of hit and run against the security apparatus in Egypt. Finally, they came to a dead end. Finally, in 1997, in jail, when their leaders were in jail, they kind of they had this famous revision. They call it muraja'at. Muraja'at is kind of like a review. So they got into lengthy review of their career or their struggle. And they ended up with a conclusion that we have been pursuing the wrong approach. This armed struggle is not correct. It's not valid. It's fruitless. It will get us nowhere. So, etc., etc. They laid down counter argument, if you will. There were a number of documents and books published in this regard, which generated further division among those who accepted it and those who rejected it, etc., etc. There was big discussion. It took a good while. So now in Syria, really there is this political naivety, if you will, and again, I alluded to this when I said earlier, like one of them say, Dr. Abdullah, Dr. Hudayfa Abdullah Azzam, the son of the late Abdullah Azzam, who was very active in Afghanistan. Hudayfa at one time, he openly said, okay, look, he said, look, the Afghan Mujahideen, they operated along the principle of shared interests. He said, look, we know that Americans are not our friend, but the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So since Americans are against a Soviet occupier, so okay, why not? Then we can seek support from the American. We could, use American aid and help to get over the Soviets. And so he was said, look, this is what happened in Afghanistan, and there's no reason not to repeat it in Syria. So this kind of naive thinking, that's what led to these tragedies in Syria. And when it goes without saying that this state, well, Qatar, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Turkey, France, Britain. There is no free lunch here, and the governments and states, they are not charity organization. They are not, they don't have this heart for looking after the orphans or the needy, what have you. This is nonsense, rubbish. So it's obvious that there are always strings attached. So this state, when they send you whatever they send you, whatever fund or weapons or what have you, there are strings attached where you end up serving their agenda. So and this is it's a big mess. It is a big mess. With the result, look now. Of course, now we are talking in hindsight. We're not, after 10 years, but certainly this was very clear from the beginning. No armed because when you engage in a confrontation, in a struggle against a state, which is in this case Syria. Syria, it's the regime of Bashar al-Assad, or for that matter Mubarak or anybody. This regime not only has local resources and war material and mukhabarat and everything, media, and beside the issue of legitimacy, so-called legitimacy, not only he has all of these resources available to him, but then even when assuming the rebel, they managed to get enough strength to cause him headache. Okay, the Assad, he could always resort to Iraq, he could resort to Iran, he could resort to Russia, So at the end, the basic question is, can I beat Russia? Can I beat Iran? Can I beat America? Yeah, if and when I fail to understand that Bashar al-Assad is protected by the American, then I know nothing. And there is no point in wasting any effort. And this is really sheer ignorance and blindness and the naivety of Allahu Akbar fi sabilillah. This is it doesn't cut. This is not enough just for you screaming Allahu Akbar fi sabilillah, and this is very superficial and very childish way of approaching such a serious issue. And sadly, that's what happened.
But in the case of the Syrian arena, that many Islamic groups supported the militias and gave them moral support. But I suppose their support also came from an Islamic scriptural basis. They imagined that there's many hadith which talk about Syria as the abode of a future Islamic order, and there are lots of good signs in the narrations about Asham and the people of Asham. Are you saying that in the cool light of day, these Islamic texts shouldn't affect our political thinking and our political program as Muslims?
Certainly not. This alleged text, they have no bearing on the struggle you are engaged in. So and there is no way that this text should be misquoted or misused in justifying the connection. That this has nothing to justify or to argue that it's okay to get funds from Qatar or Saudi Arabia or the Operation Command in Amman run by America and Britain, or the Operation Command in Turkey run by America and Britain. This is very naive and very ignorant, and it reflects the blindness where you end up being you end up being a chess game. You are being played by outside powers, and at the cost of what? At the cost of destroying the country and the people. So this is total, very naive and totally wrong.
We're now at a stage of the so-called Arab winter that we now see that many of these states have become ungovernable. So Syria, for example, or Libya, which we haven't spoken about, but is another example of a mess, really, when it comes to the Arab Spring. When looking at the last 10 years, could you fault someone who comes to the conclusion that any thought or any aspiration for sincere Islamic leadership is a distant aspiration, especially when we see the state of the Muslim world? I mean, apart from Turkey maybe and a few other countries, even the very basic parameters of what a state and how a state should function has collapsed as a result of the schisms of this last 10 years.
This issue will take us to the kind of the broader, long-term, more panoramic viewpoint. In other words, where we are not only examining the matter of a few years, really. Yes, the Arab Spring has so far been 10 years old, but 10 years is nothing when considering the long march of the Ummah, of the nation. So historical events and major radical transformation may very well last much longer than a decade or two. Yes, I know at the beginning there was high aspiration, and actually the Western leaders, they were very aware of the potential involved here. I remember the Russian president at the time, Dmitry Medvedev, he had a statement saying that the Arab Spring has a potential of reshaping the global geopolitical stage. And even he gave the analogy to the fall of Berlin Wall back in 1989. So yes, and here and there, various personality thinkers, etc. They expressed it. They expressed the hope that maybe finally that this Arab Spring would materialize in producing some fresh third way out for the global civilization in crisis. There were many who expressed such opinion. So what I'm saying here again, from a larger perspective, and in spite of this setback or disappointment that we have seen recently, you may, if you want to call it an Arab winter, but I think when viewed against the historical backdrop, then no, I think that this Arab Spring will be a positive step forward, provided due lessons are extracted from it. Unless and until we really extract the due lessons, then indeed it is a winter, and it is a tragedy. And in this regard, sadly, like in the case of Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, Muslim Brotherhood in Syria, the Salafi movement in Egypt, the Salafi movement in Syria, Al-Qaeda, the Jihadi group, or the Brotherhood in Tunisia, by the way. We didn't mention Tunisia. This is it's another chapter that deserves fuller examination. Tunisia is a place where the Arab Spring started. The Nahda people, they thought, oh, let's be smarter. Let's learn the wisdom of what happened in Egypt. Let's not be sacrificed by the opposing forces in Tunisia. So they flipped 180 degrees and they went overboard to prove to the secular liberal forces in Tunisia and the Western governments, to prove that the Nahda, we are not extremists, we are very moderate, we are very democratic, we play by the book, we play by the game that you devise, and we will go on as far as distancing ourselves from anything Islamic. And in the 10th conference held by Al-Nahda in June 2016, they officially and publicly endorsed the notion that we are the so-called the division or separation between the religious side and the political side. We are no longer religious movement. We are strictly political movement, and period. In other words, we will not accept for the mingling of religion and politics. So, which is explicitly adopting the secular agenda, and this is a disaster by itself. That we will play nice now, and we'll present this face that we are liberal, etc., etc. No, this is enough is enough, and things have to be faced squarely. So Al-Nahda has failed miserably in Tunisia, and similarly the Muslim Brotherhood, they have the responsibility and the obligation to review their record, and I'm not aware so far that this has happened. Sadly, for whatever reasons, the Muslim Brotherhood, they keep this arrogance. They don't accept responsibility for what went wrong in Egypt and Syria, for that matter. And similarly for the jihadi group. The jihadi group also, they, to some extent, jihadi group are splintered into several groups. So there has been various heated discussion among them. But in brief, what I'm saying is that the Arab Spring, when taken into historical perspective, then, and provided the lessons have been extracted, then yes, it would be a positive step forward. What comes to mind, say, what happened like back in Europe in 1848, or even the French Revolution in 1789. The French Revolution, which occupied Europe for a quarter century and ended up with a military defeat at the hand of Napoleon. And the French Revolution was defeated militarily, but its intellectual and political platform, eventually it became victorious later on, and it led to the reshaping of the political landscape in Europe.
So, Dr. Osman Bakhach, your specialism is the subject of pluralism, and that was the subject of your research, and how Islam can bring together different grades of Islamic thought under a single platform. How can we draw upon the Islamic evidences to put right the current sorry state of the Islamist political groupings and the lack of cooperation and brotherhood that's pretty apparent in the case studies we looked at today?
Well, yes, this is a central issue, really. It's a central issue. And it is a fact. It is a fact that the mainstream Islamic movement have seen a multitude of parties and movements which reflect various interpretation or ijtihad and so on. So, and as the summary of the events of the Arab Spring have clearly proven, that really there is a dire need for the kind of coalescing or channeling together all of these efforts aimed at the true liberation from Western hegemony, and for the aiming at the restoration and resumption of the Islamic way of life in establishing Islamic State. This requires there is a key challenge here, namely that we have to recognize and realize that different interpretation at a minimum, they, on the one hand, they have the right to exist. In other words, okay, while our group has formulated its own platform or decision regarding various issues, so and so, we are not in any position to impose our thinking or our interpretation upon others, and vice versa. So this entails we recognize the right of the other groups. They, as much as we did our ijtihad, then surely they have the right to do their own ijtihad. And the divergence in ijtihad should not be an obstacle in all of us working for the common good of the deen and the ummah. And this is a challenge really that cannot be postponed. As we have discussed, whether in Egypt or in Syria, in both cases, the various Islamic tendencies, they went in a different direction. At the end was very tragic to everybody. So this requires that the notion that we are the Islamic movement, this needs to be modified. We have to be more willing to accept the others, and while allowing for different ijtihad, if you will, but then again, that should not be an obstacle or a reason to prevent us working together for the common good of the deen and the ummah. This is a big challenge. I'm not belittling it. It's a big challenge, as well at the same time. Enough is enough, and everybody needs to come together to really extract the lessons learned from this past decade, and that should be helpful in drafting the course for the struggle, which is still ongoing. We have to be honest and facing the reality. We have to highlight what went wrong and how to be avoided.
I mean, I wonder to what extent that willingness is present in the current frame of mind of all of the Islamic groups, right? Which you've spoken about, and those you haven't spoken about. I mean, is there really that willingness? If I can make an observation, and maybe it's just based on anecdotes, but if I can make an observation, I would say that after the Arab Spring, none of the lessons have been learned. And if anything, Islamic groups are far more exclusivist and far more exceptionalist in their attitude towards their groupings and towards each other. And I think that's a major obstacle. And I share your concern. That's a major obstacle and a major barrier to any possible political change if one is going to receive fellow Muslims and see them as an obstacle because of an ijtihadi point.
Well, this is a challenge really, and it's as far as I know. Yes, you are right. This lesson has not been derived yet. If you're asking about the whole wide spectrum of the various Islamic movements, and I think this is really of utmost importance now and urgency that should be pursued. Now, at the same time, the recent events in Egypt and Syria and so on, have also shown that people, by and large, they are very much fed up and frustrated, and to some extent they have lost hope in many of these Islamic movements. So unless and until this Islamic movement really wake up and face the truth, then they risk being sidelined. The people will not wait for them. You want to go along thinking that you are the hero, you are the savior, you are the Islamic movement. Okay, fine, do. Who cares? People will not care for you, simply. So this is they will ditch you, and they will seek other ways.
Dr. Osman Bakhach, Jazakallah khair for your time today, and you've really raised some interesting points, and I pray, inshallah ta'ala, that we can learn some good lessons from this, and that some hope can be brought to the problems that are consuming this Muslim ummah.
Inshallah. Jazakallah khair.
Next time, inshallah, we'll speak to Dr. Azam Tamimi on his views on the Arab Spring. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.